The king of Termez, a man who relished the finer things in life, decided he desired grapes from the distant sun-kissed vineyards of Samarkand. Not just any grapes, mind you, but the plumpest, sweetest, most succulent grapes imaginable. A proclamation was issued, echoing through the bustling marketplace, reaching every corner of the kingdom.
Hear ye, hear ye. The decree is simple. The finest grapes from Samarkand, delivered to the palace within 3 days.
Now our jester, a fellow known for his quick wit and even quicker temper, happened to be indulging in a particularly sticky date pastry when the news reached him. He choked, spluttered, and nearly swallowed his silver jester's bell whole.
3 days, the very notion is preposterous. Why, it takes a full day to polish my shoes, let alone embark on such an absurd errand.
You see, our jester, despite his sharp tongue and penchant for poking fun, possessed a surprising sense of loyalty to the king. A misguided, somewhat melodramatic sense of loyalty, perhaps, but loyalty nonetheless. And so, fueled by a mixture of panic and sticky date pastry, he resolved to be the one to deliver the coveted grapes to his beloved sovereign. Thus began our jester's ill-conceived, utterly chaotic and surprisingly enlightening journey. Our jester, with a speed that belied his usual penchant for leisurely naps under the shade of pomegranate trees, procured the fastest horse in the royal stables. He galloped out of the city gates, leaving a trail of dust and bewildered onlookers in his wake. The poor horse, unused to such breakneck speeds, didn't stand a chance.
Oh, bother.
The first horse, its noble heart giving out after a mere hour of frantic galloping, collapsed beneath a weeping willow tree. He promptly commandeered a donkey from a nearby farmer, promising untold riches upon his return. The donkey, though not known for its speed, managed to double the horse's travel time before succumbing to exhaustion. The jester, now sweating profusely and beginning to resemble a wilted lettuce, was forced to continue on foot. His progress, as you can imagine, was less than impressive. Meanwhile, back at the palace, the court buzzed with anticipation. The king, his appetite whetted by the prospect of the legendary Samarkand grapes, had everyone on edge. The courtiers whispered amongst themselves, placing bets on who would be the first to return with the coveted fruit.
Do you think the jester stands a chance? Or will it be one of the knights?
The king, ever the showman, encouraged the speculation, even going so far as to offer a sizable reward for the successful participant. As the hours ticked by, however, and the anticipated heroes failed to materialize, a sense of unease settled over the court. Where were the brave knights, the cunning merchants, the fleet-footed messengers, and more importantly, where in the world was the jester? On the third day, just as the sun began its final descent, a figure stumbled into the grand hall. It was the jester, covered in dust, his clothes torn, his face a mask of exhaustion and despair. He clutched something in his hand, but it was most definitely not a basket laden with plump, juicy grapes. The court gasped. The king demanded, "Well, where are my grapes?" The jester, his usual boisterous energy replaced by a weariness that seemed to seep into his very bones, simply held out his hand. In it lay not the triumphant bounty of Samarkand, but a single withered grape. A grape so shriveled and sad-looking that it could have brought a tear to the eye of a stone gargoyle. The jester presented it, saying, "Your Majesty, I bring you a grape." The king stared at the pathetic specimen, then at his jester, his face a mask of disbelief and rapidly mounting fury. In the silence that followed, the wise Rumi stepped forward and spoke. "Your Majesty, do not be disheartened by the appearance of this grape. Remember, the wound is the place where the light enters you." The court fell silent, reflecting on Rumi's words, as the king's fury began to wane, replaced by a contemplative calm. "A grape?" roared the king, his voice echoing through the stunned silence of the court. "One single miserable grape after 3 days?"
A grape? One single miserable grape after 3 days?
The court held its breath. The queen dabbed at her forehead with a silken handkerchief. A nervous whimpering emanated from the general direction of the king's pet monkey.
Silence!
Thundered the king, and even the monkey knew better than to disobey. He turned to his most trusted advisor, a man whose beard was longer than the jester's entire body.
Minister, what is the meaning of this outrage? What is to be done with this incompetent fool?
The minister, stroking his impressive beard thoughtfully, surveyed the scene.
Your Majesty, while the jester's actions demonstrate a certain lack of foresight, perhaps we might view this as a teachable moment.
The king, his anger momentarily abated by the minister's calm demeanor, raised an eyebrow.
Teachable, and how, pray tell, do you propose we teach this buffoon a lesson he won't soon forget?
The minister smiled, a rather unsettling smile that boded ill for anyone on the receiving end of his wisdom.
Imprisonment, Your Majesty. A week in the dungeons, on a diet of bread and water, should provide ample time for reflection.
The jester, who had been staring at the withered grape in his hand as if it held the secrets to the universe, looked up sharply.
Imprisonment? He squeaked, his voice barely a whisper. But Your Majesty, I merely wanted to please you.
The king scoffed.
By bringing me a solitary, desiccated grape? I believe your efforts have achieved the precise opposite, you witless fool.
The jester, on his knees, holds up the single withered grape towards the king. The king looks furious.
No, Your Majesty, you misunderstand.
The jester, suddenly emboldened, stood tall, meeting the king's gaze with surprising firmness.
It is not the grape itself that matters, but the journey it represents.
The king, taken aback by the jester's unexpected defiance, leaned back in his throne.
Oh, and what profound wisdom does this journey impart?
The jester took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts.
Your Majesty, in my haste to fulfill your desire, I acted without thought or planning. I sacrificed valuable resources, exhausted myself, and ultimately achieved nothing but this. He held up the withered grape. This testament to my folly.
He paused, letting his words sink in.
The journey to Samarkand, I have learned, is not one to be rushed. It requires patience, planning, and a respect for the limitations of time and distance.
The king, intrigued despite himself, gestured for the jester to continue.
Just as a farmer cannot force the grapes to ripen before their time, so too must we accept that some things cannot be hurried. True satisfaction, like a perfectly ripened grape, comes to those who wait.
He looked at the king, his expression earnest.
The grape may be withered, Your Majesty, but the lesson it carries is anything but.
The king, who had been listening with growing interest, stroked his chin thoughtfully.
So you believe this entire fiasco has been enlightening?
Indeed, Your Majesty, I have learned that true effort lies not in blind haste, but in careful consideration and a willingness to adapt.
He paused, a mischievous glint returning to his eye.
Besides, I believe I have discovered the perfect use for this solitary grape.
The king raised an eyebrow.
Oh?
Indeed, Your Majesty, it would seem to be the ideal size for a certain royal monkey.
The court erupted in laughter, the tension that had gripped them for the past hour dissipating like mist in the morning sun. Even the king, unable to suppress a chuckle, had to admit the jester had a point. The king, his anger abated, saw the wisdom in the jester's words. He realized that his own desire for instant gratification had fueled the jester's frantic actions. The punishment, he now understood, should not be for the jester's failure, but for his own impatience. He called for silence, and the laughter died down.
My jester, you have indeed learned a valuable lesson, and in doing so you have taught us all a thing or two about patience, perseverance, and the importance of appreciating the journey, not just the destination.
He turned to the court.
Let this be a reminder to us all that true wisdom often lies in the most unexpected of places, and that even the most foolish of actions can hold valuable lessons.
And so the jester, spared from a week of bread and water in the dungeons, was hailed as something of a hero. The tale of his journey to Samarkand became the stuff of legend, a cautionary yet humorous reminder that even the most ridiculous situations can offer profound insights. The withered grape, carefully preserved in a velvet pouch, became a treasured possession of the king's pet monkey, who, it must be said, looked quite dashing with a single shriveled grape dangling from his ear. As for the king, he developed a newfound appreciation for the art of patience and was never known to demand out-of-season grapes again. And the jester? He continued to serve his king with wit and wisdom, always mindful of the lessons learned on that fateful journey to Samarkand. Because sometimes, dear reader, it is in our greatest follies that we discover our greatest truth.